right, welcome everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce Sopuruchi Aboh. Sopuruchi received his BA in Linguistics and Info and his MA in Linguistics from the University of Nigeria. He later served as an assistant lecturer in the Department of Linguistics and Nigerian Languages at the same university, where he taught courses in sociolinguistics and phonetics, among other topics. And currently, Sopuruchi is a PhD student in the Department of English and Communication at Hong Kong Polytechnic University in China. This semester, we're fortunate to have him with us as a visiting graduate student in the Speech Acquisition Lab in the Linguistics Department. Sopuruchi has a wide range of research interests, including language attitudes, multilingualism, discourse analysis, pragmatics, and Igbo linguistics. The title of his thesis is Accent and Social Evaluation, Sociolinguistic Analysis of Language Attitudes, Stereotypes, and Learner Bias in Universities in Nigeria. And we get a glimpse of this work today in his talk titled Understanding and Examining Attitudes Towards Nigerian English. So please join me in naming Sopuruchi.
Thank you, Colonel, for the introduction. And thank you, and Rachel, for serving as my host during my visit here at the U. And thank you all for coming to listen to a talk about Nigerian Englishes. I'm also grateful to my supervisor, Professor Hans Ladegard, for his guidance throughout this research project. So what I'm going to do here is to present the findings of two of my recent publications. The first one on the Nigerian students' attitudes toward endonormative varieties of Nigerian English, published in the Journal of Multilingual and Multicultural Development. And then secondly, to present also a study on ethnic categorization and the underlying reasons for categorization, published in Lingua 2 months ago. And to give us a brief overview of what we're going to cover today, I'm going to provide a research background of language attitude research and a little bit of background on the linguistic landscape in Nigeria, some dash of theory, and the overall methodology of the study. And then I'll present the study 1 and the study 2, and we can reflect on some overall conclusion. So in their recent edited volume on research methods in language attitude research, Kecha and Zip underscored the importance of studying accent discrimination and language attitudes. And in that study, they highlighted different contexts, different sociolinguistic contexts where language attitude research has been done. And these include educational settings, law settings, and even in job interviews. And one of the consistent findings across language attitude studies is that varieties that are standardized varieties or varieties with high vitality tend to receive more favorable ratings than non-standardized and varieties with low vitality. And studies have also tried to draw a correlation between attitudes towards varieties and the speakers of the given varieties, which suggests that if an individual or a group of persons have positive attitudes towards a particular variety, there is always a chance that they're going to also have a positive attitude towards the speakers of that variety. And so for this study, I'm going to focus more on how language attitude works in educational settings, and then using Nigeria as a case study. And having said that, I'm going to provide a brief overview of the linguistic landscape of Nigeria. So Nigeria has over 520 living languages, and we have over 250 ethnic groups. According to Eberhard et al. 2023, it makes Nigeria to be the third most linguistically diverse country after Papua New Guinea and Indonesia. And out of these 520 living languages, 3 major languages can be found, and these include Hausa, Igbo, and Yoruba. Based on the demography, the number of the speakers of these languages, and their critical role they played during the early years of Nigerian formation. And we have three exoglossic languages: English, French, and Arabic. Because of Nigeria's colonial history or legacy with Britain, English is the second language of many Nigerians, and it is also the official language. French often performs foreign language, serves as a foreign language, and serves as a language that Nigerians use to maintain international relationship with our Francophone neighbors. And because over 50% of Nigerians are Muslims, so Arabic performs mainly religious functions among these people. And we also have a variety of English in Nigeria, which we call Pidgin. And Pidgin has English as the substrate, and then we have words from indigenous languages as the substrate. So you can have some, and it has been codified and described and has attracted enough linguistic attention. And so before, it was regarded as the language of illiterates, but currently its status has improved and it can be spoken by anyone. And it also functions as a marker of solidarity and belonging. And for this study, I'm going to focus on the attitudes towards the varieties of English spoken by the Hausa, Igbo, and ethnolinguistic. And in this case, I'm looking at attitudes towards Hausa English, Igbo English, and Yoruba English. And to give us a brief context of what Nigerian English is all about. I've spoken for about 2 minutes, and you could already tell that how I speak English is different from how you speak English, and which shows that there is a kind of English which we can broadly associate with Nigerians. So broadly speaking, we can define Nigerian English as the English spoken by Nigeria. And if we look at it from a narrow perspective, we can refer to it as the phonological, grammatical, and lexical properties that distinguish the English used in Nigeria from the varieties of English elsewhere. This is a quote got from Jowett 2019. And at the phonological, morphosyntactic, and pragmatic levels, we can see features that characterize Nigerian English. At the phonological level, we can zoom in and find different features that characterize Hausa, Igbo, and Yoruba English. At the morphosyntactic and pragmatic level, scholars tend to give these features a broader interpretation by looking at it from the broader perspective of Nigeria. So research on the peculiarities of Nigerian English at the level of morphosyntactic and pragmatic, at the level of ethnic groups, have not really been studied. So at the morphosyntactic and pragmatic level, we look at the features from the broad category. And at the some examples are, for instance, at the morphosyntactic level, Nigerians tend to use certain phrases when they mean something else. And you can see some differences between it and the standard British English. For instance, Nigerian says, "I am coming," when they mean "I'm leaving." And they say, you can hear them talk about "talk less of" when they want to mean "let alone." And next tomorrow is the way they represent the day after tomorrow. And moving forward, there are different parameters that we can use to classify or identify Nigerian English. One of such is the educational parameter. And here we look at the lecture categories: the basic lect, the mixed-lect, and the acrolect. So the basic lect is the variety of English spoken by those who had little or no education. And it is often characterized by high presence of phonological interference from their L1. Mixed-lect is people who had primary or secondary education. And then acrolecto is often considered to be the English spoken by the educated Nigerians. By these, they mean those who had at least a university degree. And then another way to conceptualize or look at Nigerian English is from the ethnic or regional level. That is, the English are spoken by different ethnic groups. And by this, it means how different indigenous languages affects people when they speak English. So that's why we talk about Hausa English, Igbo English, and Yoruba English. But according to Jowett, he prefers to look at it from the standard based. And so he categorized Mexilect and Mexolect under the non-acrolectal variety of Nigerian English, and then looks at the acrolectal as a standalone parameter. So acrolectal Nigerian English, which is the concept I'm using in this presentation, is English as spoken by educated Nigerians. And then non-acrolectal are those, is a variety spoken by those who did not have a university degree and those who also didn't have any formal education. And the major theory that I'm drawing on in my study is Giles et al.'s ethnolinguistic vitality theory, which explains what makes a group behave as a distinctive and active collective entity in intergroup situations. And in ethnolinguistic vitality theory, 3 variables are really crucial, and these are status, demography, and institutional support. So status has to do with the prestige of the speakers of a particular language or variety. Demography has to do with the number of the speakers, and the institutional support has to do with the extent to which this language is used in official settings. And also, there's a distinction between objective and subjective vitality. Objective vitality has to do with the vitality of a language based on some statistical or quantitative results, based on sensors or any data that is verifiable. And then subjective vitality is speakers' subjective opinion about how viable their language is. And so when we apply or when we relate ethnolinguistic vitality theory to language attitude research, it refers to what I said in the beginning, that the vitality of a language or a variety influences the attitude towards it. And by this, I mean that languages or varieties with high vitality will likely be favorably evaluated on status and solidarity than languages with low vitality. And that takes me to the methodology that I adopt for this study. So for those who are familiar with language attitude research, the common text or the common instrument used to conduct language attitude research is either the verbal guise experiment or the matched guise experiment. So the verbal guise experiment is an indirect approach to measuring language attitude. It uses different L1 speakers of the varieties under study as voice stimuli. And this is in contrast to matched guise, which uses one individual as the speakers of, as a speaker of the different varieties under study. And the essence, the reason why I used the verbal guise text is because it creates more authentic guises than the matched guise test. And I didn't have to use any fillers to distract the participants from thinking that these voices they've heard were said by one person. And this is an example of the matched guise, the verbal guise question here, where you play the voices to the students or the participants, and then ask them to rate the speakers on these personality traits. This is just part of them. And for this study, since I'm working on 3 varieties of Nigerian English, so I recruited 6 speakers who are L1 speakers of these varieties. And for each variety, I used a pair of a male and a female. And then they read a paragraph, a short paragraph that has to do with research. And they read it as naturally as possible. And the reason for using read speech as opposed to spontaneous speech is to ensure that there is consistency in what is being measured. And if the average recording of all the speakers was about 37 seconds. And I played these voices to about 10 students. in a mini pilot study who confirmed that they were comparable in terms of speech quality, volume, and then they also confirmed that they were authentic speakers of the varieties under study. And so I played these voices to 406 Nigerian students in 3 different universities. For the first university, there were 151. In the second university, there were 144. And in the third university, there were 111. And these universities were located in the southeast, the southeastern, the southwestern, and the north central geopolitical zones in Nigeria, where these varieties that I'm testing are commonly known. And there were 138 males and 268 females. To give us an idea of the phonological features of these speakers that these participants listen to. So for the Hausa speaker, which these features that I observed from the prompts that I gave to these speakers are similar to what's have been reported in the literature. So for the Hausa speaker, there is often this mapping of P onto F. So in words where there is F, they substitute P. So for instance, in afraid or frontiers, they will say afraid or frontiers. That this is one of their features. And then they also substitute B for V. So in discover, they will say discover. And then other will be other. And when we look at the Igbo English, we have this change from this palatalized N to the palatal sound. So instead of saying new, they will say new. And then there is this dentalization also of T in intervocalic position. And for the Yoruba English speakers, we have these H insertion and H deletion. So they add H where there shouldn't be, and then they delete H where there should be. And one thing that is observable in these features is that for these speakers, it is easier to differentiate them based on their pronunciation of consonants than it is for us to differentiate them at the vocalic level. And so, just like I showed earlier, the items, the personality traits, the participants evaluated the speakers on were 13, and these items were categorized into 3 dimensions: the status, solidarity, and quality of language. So for status, we have education, self-confidence, leadership, wealth, and intelligence. For solidarity, we have friendliness, sincerity, sense of humor, and some appeal. And then for quality of language, participants assessed the speakers based on model of pronunciation, correctness, processing fluency, and executive quality. And these items were measured on a 5-point Likert scale, ranging from 1 to 5, where 1 stands for not at all, and 5 stands for very much. So next, I'm going to present the descriptive results of the evaluations of these speakers. So from this table, one thing we have to observe is that for the status, solidarity, and quality of language, the Yoruba English speaker received the highest favorable rating, and then followed by the Igbo English speaker. And then the Hausa English speakers were weighted or evaluated as the least attractive. With these mean scores, I proceeded to run a repeated measures analysis of variance, and the results for status ratings were significant. Here, the Yoruba English was significantly rated higher than the Igbo and the Hausa English speakers. For solidarity ratings, the Hausa English speaker was significantly rated lower than Igbo and Yoruba English speakers. But between the Igbo and Yoruba English speakers in terms of solidarity, there was no significant result. The p-value was 0.336. And for the quality of language ratings, the result was statistically significant. And here, as we saw for status ratings, the Yoruba English speaker also received higher ratings than the Igbo English and the Hausa English speakers. So to summarize this study one, we would observe that when we look at the mean scores, the Yoruba English speakers, they're rated more favorably on status, solidarity, and quality of language dimension. When we look at the ANOVA results, we can find significant difference on status and quality of language dimensions. And here, the results also showed that Hausa English speakers were rated as the least attractive. So the results from this study provides alternative idea or explanations to what is commonly known in ethnolinguistic vitality theory, where high political status or high prestige often equals high linguistic status. And in Nigeria, for instance, the Hausa ethnolinguistic group is the largest. It has the highest landmass, and it has the highest population. And in terms of Nigerians' political setting, they are also at the top there. So one would expect that the varieties spoken by them would receive more favorable ratings than other varieties, but that's not the case. So in the Nigerian sociolinguistic setting, what it suggests is that there is this asymmetry between political prestige or prestige of speakers and then the positive evaluation of their variety of English. And the possible reason to explain why the Yoruba English speakers were rated more favorably than others is when we look at the sociolinguistic of English language in Nigeria, findings or studies have shown that the Yoruba speakers, the Yoruba ethnolinguistic group, were the first to embrace Western education before others. So they had early access to English, and they have been speaking English before other ethnolinguistic groups. And that could explain why their variety of English was considered the better variety of Nigerian English in Nigeria. And so one thing as well that I was thinking, or that I put forward in the first paper, was if there is, to an extent, a positive evaluation of varieties of Nigerian English, we need to rethink and find a way of introducing a Nigerian-based educational model of English, which students in Nigeria are familiar with. Most of the times in Nigerian schools, there is this mismatch between the exonormative norms that they are being introduced to in schools and what they are familiar with. And this could be one of the reasons why there is this poor English performance among Nigerian students. And many Nigerian students could not gain admission into universities because they were expected to graduate English. And this is probably because there is no exemplar model of English which they are taught in schools, and which the exemplar model of English which they are taught in school is different from the one they see in their daily life. And I will move forward to present the findings of the second study. So this second study is a continuation of the first study. It is the same research instrument, but to provide a context for us to understand and appreciate the findings of the study, I would want to briefly talk about ethnic or social categorization and evaluations as it is obtained in the literature. It was Kristen was one of the first scholars that suggested the inclusion of an item in a verbal guise experiment questionnaire, asking participants to indicate the nationality or ethnicity of the speakers they've heard, to be able to ascertain if they are actually sure of the voices they've heard, and to see if that has a way of influencing their evaluation. And when we look at the study, at the literature on ethnic categorization and evaluation, one critical issue being raised is the fact that ethnic categorization is mediated by stereotypes and in-group identity, which suggests that if participants feel that the speaker they've heard is a member of their ethnic group or of their speech community, they would tend to rate them higher than they would if they feel he's not from their ethnic group. And from the studies that I came across that included this item in their study, one observable thing is the fact that there is no perfectly accurate identification and categorization of speakers. In all the studies, none of the participants have been able to fully or perfectly say that the speaker they've heard is from the actual ethnic or social group they were from. And possible reasons for this imperfect recognition of speakers' ethnicity or nationality is due to the complexity of associating linguistic features to a particular ethnic group. And it also could be because of insufficient awareness of the participants towards the varieties that they are assessing. And then this last point, specificity, is a factor that was observed in Dragojevic's study, where he expected participants to provide a broad category, and when they move towards providing specific categories, it could also lead to imperfect recognition of speakers' ethnicity. And another critical thing observed in these studies is that participants tend to recognize speakers of their own variety more than the outgroup varieties, because that is the variety we are aware of. And another argument that we will see in the literature is some scholars argue that if participants were able to accurately identify the speaker's ethnic group, and those who were unable to identify the speaker's ethnic group, that there is no difference in their evaluation. So if group A rates them favorably, group B will also rate them favorably. And others found that there is actually a difference between those who accurately identified and those who did not accurately identify. If I'm going to attempt to simplify this complex process of ethnic categorization or accent identification and evaluation, I would say that it involves three processes where participants perceive the speech that they've heard, and then try to recognize the speech features, and then using the speech features that they have recognized to map them on ethnic category that they feel that the speech features index. And for this study, what I did was, after listening to the speakers, there were two open-ended questions that asked the participants to state which ethnic group they think the speaker is from, and then to provide a reason why they thought so. And I collected the responses and coded all of them, and it resulted in 8 categories of ethnic categorization, and then 8 categories of reasons for categorization. I proceeded to conduct percentage counts of these categories, and then use the categorical variables to run a 2-way contingency table analysis. And this is the result for the ethnic categorization. So here we have 8 categories: ethnicized, foreign, Hausa, Igbo, Middle Belt, no idea, South, and Yoruba. 4 things that I want to draw our attention to in this figure is the use or this category, the ethnicized. So the category is as a result of participants' responses to this question by saying that they could not identify any ethnicity of the speaker, and there is no mother tongue interference in the person's speech. So, which suggests that for some Nigerians, these speakers are moving from an ethnic sounding speech to an ethnically neutral speech, whereby it is becoming difficult for them to be identified based on their ethnicity. And Hausa was the highest variety to be accurately identified, followed by Igbo, 56.6%, and then Yoruba, which is 39%. And one thing we'll notice from these Igbo and Yoruba category is the misidentification of the Igbo speakers as Yoruba by 35% of the participants, and 14.7% of the participants misidentified the Yoruba speakers as Igbo. I will explain more about this in a minute. For the question that asked them to state the reasons for categorizing the speakers into the ethnic group they stated, 8 categories also emerged: accents, behavioral tendencies, good educational background, intuition, no reason, poor educational background, verbal non-fluency, and verbal fluency. So here we see that based on the percentage scores, accent was the dominant reason participants used to categorize the speakers into an ethnic group. And we also saw other reasons like verbal non-fluency, saying that because the speakers were not fluent and because they were also fluent. So based on these categories, the one for the ethnic categorization and then the one for the reasons, I conducted a 2-way contingency table analysis, and all the analysis for all the key speakers were statistically significant. And I proceeded to look at the levels that yielded this statistical significance. And one thing we observe from this table is the association between good educational background and ethnicized, which suggests that when you have good educational background, there is tendency for you to sound ethnically neutral, which means good education helps in reducing L1 interference. And we also saw significant different association in accent and Igbo, which shows that for many participants, they were able to identify the speakers based on their accent. And for the Igbo speaker, we also observed verbal fluency and the ethnicized speech, which also goes ahead to confirm that if you speak in an ethnically neutral speech, there is chance for you to be verbally fluent. And that was also one of the reasons that the participants based on to categorize the speakers. So what we observe from this second study is an example of what Deepman and Guy 2022 has conceptualized as orderly heterogeneity, which means that despite the fact that we want to believe that there are varieties, and these varieties are discrete, that at some point it is difficult to really say this is where the features that differentiate these varieties from other varieties end. And so there is no orderly heterogeneity. Instead of looking at these varieties as discrete varieties that we can just separate and put into boxes to show that they are different, that when we look at differences that exist among varieties, that we should look at them from the perspective of the degree of differences, not really absolute differences. And that could also explain why there was no fine cut identification of speakers of the varieties that I explored in this study. And like I mentioned earlier, there was this misidentification of the Hausa and of the Yoruba and the English, Yoruba and the Igbo English speakers. And this could point to a possibility of change in progress, where there tends to be a variety leveling between Igbo English and Yoruba English speakers. And this could be explained based on the geographical proximity that exists between Igbo and Yoruba people. Igbo and Yoruba belong to the southern protectorate of Nigeria. So there is high language contact that exists between these groups. And then Hausa belongs to the northern protectorate. So they are way different. And another factor that can be responsible for this is the language family that these languages belong to. Igbo and Yoruba belong to the Niger-Congo language family, and Hausa belongs to the Afro-Asiatic language family. And this study also provides evidence to the fact that non-ethnic sounding speech is categorized as fluent and can be linked to good education. And in general conclusion, I would say that the studies that I've presented highlight the evaluative hierarchy of Nigerian Englishes, where Yoruba English is seen to be at the top, and then followed by Igbo English, and then followed by Hausa English. And the second study underlines the sociopsychological processes that predict ethnic categorization and accent identification. It provides factors that enable participants to categorize speakers into ethnic groups. And it is my hope that this study would further or inspire further research on language attitudes in the Nigerian sociolinguistic context. And on a final note, one thing language attitude researchers need to do, which is what I'm also going to do for this study, is the need for us to introduce or incorporate a social activism component in language attitude research. And one of the studies that I've been doing this recently is this book by Aurelius, published earlier this year, titled All English Accents Matter in Pursuit of Accent Equity, Diversity and Inclusion. So in this case, after noting that our participants are discriminated against, after hearing their stories, it is not just enough to end it there, because that would just be that we're just doing the research of them. We need to take it forward by doing it for and with them. And this includes making their experiences known and then sensitizing people on the need for accent equity, diversity, and inclusion. Thank you all for listening, and these are my references. If you want to connect, you can send me an email in this email address. Thank you all.